"Who did this to you?" said the Mafia boss. By dawn, every man in the city feared for his life. I had lived in silence for so long that sometimes I wasn't sure I still existed. On certain days, I caught my reflection in the glass of a half-restored painting, blurred between dust and light, and thought, perhaps that is the truest image of me, present yet unseen. At the top floor of the Varela Foundation, among the scent of oil, resin, and white curtains filtering the afternoon sun, I spent my days restoring canvases whose worth could buy my entire lifetime. Every crack in the paint, every color faded by time, carried its own soul, and I, the nameless worker, was the one allowed to touch it, to bring it back to life, yet never to own it. The work felt like a sacred ritual, patient, meticulous, built on faith that even decay deserves redemption. As I brushed color over the scars of age, as my breath followed the rhythm of the strokes, I felt a frightening calm. In that small golden room, there was only the painting, the light, and the sound of my heartbeat. Julian Varela, the man who owned it all, rarely appeared. People called him many things: a silent philanthropist, a collector of lost souls, a businessman whose fortune moved through art like smoke. To me, he was only the shadow that crossed the marble hallway, the soft echo of shoes against stone, the faint scent of cedar and mint that lingered after he passed. He spoke little and looked even less, yet whenever our eyes met, I felt stripped bare, seen through, not seen. Maybe he wasn't truly looking at me at all, but at something reflected through me, the way one studies a painting still unfinished behind glass. I didn't resent it. I was born to live on the edges of beauty, to serve it but never belong to it. When night folded over the city, I left that bright, silent room and returned to a small apartment in Brooklyn, where hallway lights flickered and walls were thin enough to hear strangers argue. There I lived with Nora, my younger sister, the only person left who reminded me my heart was still beating. Nora worked as a pastry chef for the Foundation's events, 23, quick-smiled, sugar-scented, always humming. Each evening she told me stories about the elegant parties, the people of power who never once looked her in the eye. I listened, smiled, and quietly drowned in the emptiness spreading beneath my ribs. We once had a mother, a woman who believed love and patience could mend anything, even the world. She died 2 years ago, taking the softness with her. Cancer consumed her body, and the bills devoured everything else. Even after the funeral, envelopes from the hospital kept arriving, as if death itself demanded installments. Total debt, $47,000. A number carved into my chest like a crack no restorer could repair. I worked every hour offered, took every project, hoping that my wages could dull the invisible weight pressing on us. Some nights, after finishing a painting, I sat alone before it, watching the fresh varnish gleam, and thought, if someone could restore my life the way I restore theirs, I'd pay whatever it cost. But no one does that kind of work. No one fixes what's broken inside you. My world was polished silence and golden light, tiny fractures in oil and time, and the quiet breathing of a woman trying to hold herself together. I didn't know that in just a few weeks, that fragile stillness would be torn apart. And Julian Varela, the man who had never truly seen me, would be the first to make me visible again, in a way both merciless and irreversible. The rain came as if someone had opened a door in the sky. I stood by the window of the restoration room. watching water strike the glass and slide down in long, trembling lines, like time running backward. The city below blurred in steam, roofs, lights, people, melting together into one painting of gray and gold. I packed my tools, turned off the lamp, and closed the door softly behind me. The top floor of the foundation was silent as an abandoned chapel, only the rhythm of rain drumming on glass above. Each time I took the elevator down, I felt like I was leaving a world made of crystal, flawless, expensive, and cold, to return to my own, soaked in dust and rain. Nora texted me, "I'm heading home first, someone's picking me up." I smiled. She deserved someone to make her forget the exhaustion of all this. I only had my small umbrella and a pair of worn shoes, my only armor against a Manhattan downpour. 3 short blocks from the foundation to the subway. I knew every crack in the pavement, every flickering streetlight, but tonight was different. The wind howled, the rain slanted into my face, and neon lights bled across puddles, making the streets seem alive, breathing, shivering. I walked faster, clutching my bag tight. A sudden gust flipped the umbrella inside out, metal ribs snapping like bones. I laughed softly, the kind of laugh born from knowing how easily everything in your life breaks. Up ahead, at the corner where the avenue met the narrow alley, 2 men leaned against a wall, cigarette tips glowing red in the dark. Their eyes followed me as I passed, slow, deliberate. I lowered my head and quickened my pace. Footsteps peeled off the wall and merged with the sound of rain. Then a voice called behind me, casual, almost friendly. "Hey, miss." I ignored it. Seconds later, a rough hand yanked my arm. My bag slipped from my shoulder and I stumbled, hitting the wet ground. One of them spoke, his tone lazy but edged with threat. "Relax, sweetheart. Just give us the bag." "I don't have anything worth," I started, but he cut me off with a laugh drowned in thunder. "Nothing worth it? What's this then?" He snatched my employee badge, Varela Foundation. His eyes gleamed. Well, so you work for Varela." I didn't understand why that name changed the air, but it did, thickened it, sharpened it. He leaned closer, voice low and cold. "Send your boss a message, tell him we're not done." Then the first punch landed. The world tilted. I fell, my head striking concrete. A hot, metallic taste filled my mouth, blood and rain. I tried to scream, but the storm swallowed my voice. Kicks followed, methodical, precise. Bones clicked like old wood. One of them whispered, "Just a little reminder, girl, don't wear the devil's name." And then they were gone. Their footsteps faded into the night, leaving me sprawled in the alley, surrounded by the smell of rust and rain. I crawled, dizzy, half blind, following instinct more than direction. My fingers scraped against the wet pavement until they found a cold metal door. I used it to stand, trembling. My lungs burned, my legs shook, but all I could think was, go home. 3 blocks. Tonight, it felt like a lifetime. I don't remember walking, only the sound of rain and the blur of lights bleeding together. When I finally reached the apartment, Nora wasn't home yet. I staggered into the bathroom and met my reflection. Bruised, split lip, swollen eye. A drop slid from my hair down to my throat. I couldn't tell if it was rain or tears. I laughed, a small broken sound. Then I collapsed between the flickering light and the endless rain beyond the window. I don't know how long I'd been unconscious. When I opened my eyes, the darkness was still there, tinged with the gray of dawn dripping through the window. The apartment was silent except for the steady drip of water somewhere in the pipes, like a heartbeat refusing to stop. I lay curled on the cold tile floor, head pounding so hard that every breath made the world tremble. The air smelled of rust, damp, and my own blood. It took a while before I realized I could move. My left arm was numb, my ribs flared with pain each time I inhaled. I crawled toward the wall and fumbled for the switch. The weak yellow light flickered on, blinding at first. It revealed everything. My shirt stuck to my skin, dried blood on my wrist, muddy footprints trailing from the door. I let out a cracked laugh. Strange how the first thought in my head wasn't pain, but I can't afford to miss work tomorrow. Poverty really is a kind of disease that never leaves you. The door burst open. Nora froze in the doorway, her coat dripping wet, her face turning pale as her eyes found me. "Clara, oh my God." Her voice broke as she rushed forward, kneeling beside me, hands trembling as she lifted my face. "What happened? Who did this to you?" I wanted to lie, to say I slipped, fell, anything but the truth. But my mouth opened and closed without sound. Her tears hit my cheek, warm and frantic. "We're going to the hospital right now." I shook my head. "No, Nora, we can't." "You're bleeding. You might have broken ribs." "We don't have the money, don't you get it? We can't." I gripped her hand hard enough that both of us shook. "If I go to the ER, they'll send a bill, and that'll kill us faster than this." She stared at me, eyes wide with horror and helplessness. "You can't just—" "It's fine, I just need to rest. I have to work tomorrow." She said nothing more. She stood, fetched the old first aid kit, and began cleaning the wounds in silence. Each time the cotton touched my skin, I bit my lip to keep from crying out. Nora's hands trembled, and guilt tightened in my chest, watching rainwater drip from her hair onto my shoulder. When she was done, I dragged myself into the bathroom. Every step felt like glass underfoot. Hot water poured over my back, mixing with blood and dirt, running amber down the drain. I leaned my forehead against the wall and let the water wash away the sound of rain, the echo of their laughter, the humiliation clinging to my skin. I didn't cry. Crying never fixed anything. I just felt like a cracked canvas, covered with new paint, but never truly whole again. I put on a nightshirt and lay on the bed. Nora sat beside me, eyes open though it was past midnight. "What if they come back?" she whispered. "They won't," I said, unsure if I believed it. The room sank into silence. Outside, the rain hadn't stopped, only softened to a tired sigh. I drifted off near morning, the cold seeping into my bones. The alarm rang. Pale sunlight sliced through the torn curtain. I opened my eyes, every muscle protesting, but I still sat up, not from strength, but from habit. The habit of someone who can't afford to stop. In the mirror, my face was a ruined painting. One eye bruised purple, lip split, cheeks swollen. I touched it lightly, felt the sting, then inhaled. No one could see this. I opened the small makeup case, the only luxury I owned, and began hiding everything, restoring my face the way I restored art. Layer by layer, foundation covered the purple and blue. Powder, pale lipstick, a hint of mascara. When I finished, I looked like myself again, but false, distant. Someone pretending to be fine in a world that never was. Nora stood at the door, holding a cup of coffee. "You can't go in like that." "We need the money," I said quietly but firmly. "I can't miss a shift. But Julian will notice. He never looks at me." I cut her off, grabbing my bag. In that world, I'm still invisible. The morning air was sharp against my skin as I stepped outside. The city still glistened with leftover rain, streets shining like shattered mirrors. Each step made my body ache more, but I kept moving, because debt doesn't wait, and neither does survival. On the subway, surrounded by strangers, the metallic smell of steel and coffee filled the car. My hands trembled, ribs screamed, but my face remained calm, detached, as if none of it had happened. When the train pulled into the stop near the Varela Foundation, I caught my reflection in the glass door, the makeup dry, expression empty, the gray light of morning behind me. I realized the worst part wasn't the pain. It was how well I'd learned to hide it, until I almost couldn't feel it anymore. I arrived at the Varela Foundation later than usual, but no one noticed. In this building, everyone was too busy looking at themselves to see anyone else. I crossed the marble lobby like a shadow, my footsteps echoing softly, a reminder that I still existed, even if only barely. The air smelled of coffee, varnish, and damp wood, the hum of machines in the distance, the pale morning light streaming through the glass panels. Everything was so normal, it made me doubt if the night before had truly happened, or if it was just a fevered dream born of exhaustion. I kept my head down. The bruises hid beneath heavy makeup, like sins buried under skin. As long as no one asked, as long as no one touched, I could keep going. The restoration room greeted me with the familiar scent of oil and dust. Here, among the frames and colors, I belonged. Here, life could be reduced to cracks and pigments, things that could be mended. I had barely sat down when Mr. Harrow, the floor manager, spoke behind me. "Mr. Varela wants to see St. Cecilia. Bring it to the main gallery." I froze. Varela rarely looked at the pieces himself. Usually, he reviewed progress through reports and photographs. "Yes, sir," I said quietly. The painting was almost finished, just one final coat to seal the colors. I lifted it carefully, hands trembling slightly. I didn't know why, but the thought of facing him made my chest tighten. The corridor stretched long and silent, wind whispering through the old vents. I walked slowly, clutching the canvas like it was the only whole thing left in my world. When I reached the main gallery, I paused, took a breath, and opened the heavy door. Julian Varela stood with his back to me, facing the city through the tall window. Morning light brushed his shoulders, turning his gray suit into sculpture. When he turned around, I forgot to breathe. "Ms. Jensen," he said, voice low, deliberate, each syllable precise. "I'm told you're working on St. Cecilia." "Yes, sir," I replied, eyes lowered. "It's nearly complete." He gestured for me to place it on the stand. His gaze followed every movement I made. The silence between us grew sharp. As I bent down to adjust the frame, my collar shifted slightly, and I knew the makeup wasn't enough. A shadow of the bruise showed through. "What happened to your hand?" His tone was calm but edged. "I'd slipped on the stairs." "Which stairs?" His eyes didn't move from me, and the question landed like a blade. "At home," I said softly. "At your home?" "Yes." Silence, the ticking of a clock somewhere. Then he stepped closer. The distance shrank until I had to look up. That was the first time I truly met his gaze. Not the fleeting glance of hallways, but a look that stripped away every layer I'd built to hide behind. In his eyes wasn't just suspicion, there was something else. The weary recognition of someone who'd seen blood before and still hated seeing it again. "I think," he said slowly, You should be more careful. Stairs can be dangerous in this city. He didn't believe me, and we both knew it. But neither of us said another word. He turned away, sliding his hands into his pockets, eyes back on St. Cecilia. I've always liked this one, he murmured. Did you know she was killed for refusing to stay silent? There's something in her eyes that reminds me of that. I stayed quiet. The light glinted off the drying paint, and sweat prickled down my spine. When I started to leave, his voice stopped me. Ms. Jensen, he said without turning, if something happens outside of work, you should tell me. I don't like things beyond my control. I bowed my head. There's nothing, sir. I hope not. His tone deepened, a warning disguised as concern. I left, the door closing softly behind me. Only in the hallway did I exhale. My hands still trembled, my throat dry, and I understood. He had seen it. Not just the bruise, but the fear beneath it. And somehow I knew from that moment on, my quiet, invisible life would never be the same again. I thought everything would end that morning, with Julian's sharp gaze, with his heavy, precise words. But it didn't. He wasn't the kind of man who let things go once he'd noticed them. I learned that the next day, when he walked into the restoration room unannounced, a cup of steaming coffee in his hand. The entire room fell silent. I looked up, my brush still in midair, heart pounding like fists against my ribs. Ms. Jensen, he said, his voice low and cold. Let me see your hand. I blinked, confused. My hand? Yes, the one you said you hurt on the stairs yesterday. My lungs froze. I tried to speak, to find some excuse, but his eyes pinned me in place. I glanced around. Others pretended to be busy, but I could feel them listening. No one dared look. Don't hide it, he said, setting the cup down, stepping closer. Show me. I stepped back, instinct pulling me away. But that voice carried weight I couldn't defy. Slowly, I rolled up my sleeve. The light from the window slid across pale skin, revealing faint circular bruises, finger marks, impossible to mistake. Julian looked, said nothing. His expression wasn't anger or pity. It was colder, deeper. Recognition. How long? He asked quietly. 2 days, I whispered. And you still came to work? I can't afford not to. Silence stretched, then his tone changed, lower, restrained. Who did this? No one. I told you I... Don't lie to me. The words cut softly, like a blade sliding through cloth. I recognize fear when I see it. You're afraid? I turned away. I don't want to involve anyone. It's over. Over. He stepped closer, his shadow falling over me. Nothing is over when someone touches what's mine. The word mine struck like fire on skin. I didn't know if I was terrified or trembling for another reason. Listen, I said, forcing my voice steady. You don't have to do anything. I'm fine. It was random. They didn't even know who I was. His eyes narrowed. They didn't know who you were, but they knew who I am. That's enough. My hands shook. Julian, please don't get involved. That's street business, not yours. He held my gaze for a long time, then spoke slowly, each word deliberate. You were attacked on my ground. I don't get to pretend I don't know. His voice wasn't loud, but every syllable landed like stone. In his eyes there was no longer the distance of employer and employee, only the cold certainty of a man used to giving orders and being obeyed. Julian turned toward the door. Elias, he called, and the tall man in a dark suit stepped inside. I recognized him, the head of security. His eyes were like metal, calm, sharp, unreadable. Yes, sir? Find the men who did this, Julian said quietly. Every detail, names, faces, reasons. Elias nodded once and left without a word. The door closed softly. Silence again. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, barely more than a whisper. "This isn't your problem." Julian turned back, his gaze softer now, though not gentle. "You work for me. You left my building and got hurt on the road that leads here. You think that's not my problem?" I shook my head. "I don't want anyone else hurt. I just want peace." "Peace isn't yours anymore, Clara," he said quietly. "They took it from you. I'm going to take it back." I stepped back, lost for words. Gratitude tangled with fear. Something in his voice made me believe he would do exactly as he said, and that nothing could stop him. "Take the day off," he said, his tone softening, though still in order. "Elias will handle it. Stay in the East Lounge. There's a nurse. Don't argue." "I can't." "Clara." Just my name. It was enough to silence me. I nodded. He motioned to an assistant who led me out. As the door closed, I could still hear his footsteps, steady, deliberate, the sound of a man who had just decided someone else's fate. The East Lounge was wide and bright, windows opening to a small garden. The scent of cedar hung in the air, his scent. I sat on the sofa, staring at my trembling hands. For the first time in years, I felt seen. Not as a worker, not as background, but as a person. And yet, that very light terrified me. Because once you're truly seen, there's no way to hide again. That night, after Elias and the others left, the house fell into an uncanny stillness. I was taken back to the East Lounge, where the golden light on the walls looked like memories not yet dry. I thought it would end there, but silence sometimes is only a thin layer of paint, covering the storm underneath. I couldn't sleep. The East Lounge was too wide, too quiet. Everything was too clean, too soft. The white curtains, the faint scent of cedar oil, the bed that seemed too gentle for someone like me. But it wasn't the luxury that kept me awake. It was the silence, a heavy silence, as if behind these walls something was happening that I wasn't meant to hear. Around midnight, I caught the sound of voices. Not wind, not footsteps, voices. Deep, restrained, echoing faintly from downstairs. A lower voice replied, shaky, and then came a dull thud, like metal against stone. My heart stuttered. I sat up, slipped out of bed, and pressed my ear to the door. That voice, I recognized it. Julian. I don't know what I thought I was doing. Maybe it was instinct, the need to know what lived beneath the stillness of that man. I opened the door quietly. The hallway glowed dimly under the night lights, my shadow stretching long across the polished floor. I held my breath with every step. The staircase to his office was at the far end. A thin stripe of yellow light seeped through the gap under the heavy door. Smoke curled through it, faint but visible. I moved closer, pulse hammering so loud I feared they'd hear it. I peered through the crack. Inside, Julian sat in his black leather chair, half reclined, one hand holding a glass of amber liquid, the other resting lightly on the desk. Across from him were two men, bruised, swollen, barely recognizable, yet I knew them instantly. The two from the alley. My body went rigid. Another figure stood near them, tall and still, Elias, the head of security. A wall in human form. No one spoke for a moment. Then Julian's voice filled the room, low and rasped, each word deliberate. "When you laid your hands on her," he said, "did you think I'd just let it go?" One of the men started trembling. We didn't know she was yours." Julian set the glass down. The soft sound of it against wood made the air tighten. He looked up, eyes sharp as polished steel. "You didn't need to know who she was," he said. "You only needed to know she walked out of this place. That was enough." No one breathed. Elias stepped forward, laying a folder on the desk. I saw glimpses, photos, addresses, names. Julian flipped through it, then let out a dry, humorless chuckle. "Darren Cole," he read. "Sold yourself to Anton Kreshnik, and this is how you send a message. Beating women? I thought your kind had standards." The man tried to speak, but Julian lifted a finger. Elias's hand clamped down on his shoulder, forcing him back into the chair. The faint ring of metal echoed, the sound of real fear. I couldn't breathe. Sweat slicked my palms. "Don't be stupid," Julian murmured. "I don't want blood in my house. Elias." "Yes, sir. Handle it, cleanly." 4 words, calm. Final, more chilling than any gunshot. Elias nodded. The men were dragged out through the side door. The click of it closing left Julian alone in the room. He poured himself another drink, hand trembling slightly, barely visible. The lamplight carved his face into halves, light and shadow. Not a philanthropist, not a businessman. A judge, silent, absolute, dangerous. I couldn't look away. Part of me wanted to run, to forget, but another part, one I didn't recognize, felt peace. A cold, terrifying peace. Because I knew, without question, those men would never touch anyone again. I stepped back, gently closed the door, and crept upstairs. When I reached my room, I shut the door and leaned against it, my heart still crashing inside my chest. I didn't know if I should feel horrified or grateful, maybe both. But one truth settled in me, like calm after thunder. For the first time in years, I felt safe. Safe, not because of light, but because someone was willing to use darkness for me. I lay down, staring at the ceiling. Julian's face still burned behind my eyes. His voice echoed, low and cold. "When you laid your hands on her, did you think I'd just let it go?" I closed my eyes, and strangely, that night, I slept. I woke to the dim light of morning seeping through the white curtains. The rain had stopped, leaving only the scent of damp earth in the air. Everything around me felt unnervingly still, as if the world itself was holding its breath after a long night. I lay there for a while, trying to separate dreams from reality. The image of Julian's cold eyes from the warm sunlight on my skin. A soft knock at the door made me sit up. The blanket slipped from my shoulders. The door opened and Julian stepped in. No Elias, no one else. He held 2 cups of coffee, steam rising between us, blending with the rich scent of Arabica. He wore a white shirt, sleeves rolled, no tie. For the first time, he looked almost ordinary, and somehow that unsettled me more. "I didn't want to wake you," he said quietly, setting 1 cup on the table. "But I figured you haven't eaten since last night." "Thank you," I murmured, my voice still hoarse. He stood for a moment, then sat in the chair across from me, eyes steady on my face. "Are you afraid of me, Clara?" The question cut through the air, sharp and sudden. I met his gaze, searching for something, guilt, worry, or simply control. But all I saw was a kind of weary clarity, as if he was fighting a battle inside himself. "I don't know," I said slowly, honestly, "but I know I'm safe." He held my gaze a moment longer, then nodded. He didn't smile, but something in his eyes softened. "Safe," he repeated. "That's more expensive than anything I've ever bought." We sat in silence for a few breaths, the sound of the clock ticking softly between us. Then he stood, voice calm again. Get ready, I'm taking you to my doctor. That's not necessary, Clara. Just my name, low and firm. No argument. I said nothing more. The black car slid quietly through the city's damp streets. I watched people hurry past, cafes opening early, live small and unaware that only a night ago some had disappeared from this map. Julian said nothing the entire way, hands steady on the wheel, jaw tight as though he was holding himself together by force. The clinic sat high in an old stone building. Everything smelled of antiseptic and sandalwood, light soft, footsteps hushed. The doctor, an older man with silver hair, examined me with calm precision. Fractured sixth rib, he said, bruising around the left eye, split lip. Painful, but you'll heal. Rest at least 2 weeks. I heard the sound of papers, a pen scratching, and then Julian's voice behind me. No invoices, I'll handle it. I turned, ready to protest, but his look silenced me. You don't have to. I do it because I choose to, he said softly. Don't turn choice into obligation. I said nothing, only bowed my head, fingers tightening on my knees. On the way back, the sunlight poured through the car windows, glinting across his hand on the wheel. Strong, elegant hands lined with faint scars, not the kind born of labor, but of long battles for control. Can I ask you something? I said quietly. Do you always believe in that way of justice? Julian kept his eyes on the road. I believe in results. Whichever way hurts the least for those I protect, that's the way I choose. And the others, the ones you punish, they had choices too. They chose wrong. His voice was deep, measured, but not as cold as before. Something in him was both breaking and rebuilding at once. I used to think, I said, that justice lived in laws, but laws don't care about people like me. You're right, he said. Laws protect order. Justice sometimes demands sin. We fell quiet again. The city passed like film frames. I didn't know why my heart felt calmer. Maybe because, for once, someone had truly listened. When the car stopped in front of the foundation, Julian turned to me. Does it still hurt? A little. You'll stay here for a few days. I don't want you going back home. Why? Because that place isn't safe anymore. I looked out the window at the light shimmering on the wet pavement. In that moment, I knew things were changing. Not just the world around me, but something inside him. The distance between us, once cold and impossible, was beginning to melt, slow but certain. When I turned back, Julian was still looking at me. His eyes, for the first time, weren't made of steel. There was something softer, truer, and infinitely more dangerous. Because I knew from that moment on, every line between gratitude and possession, between protection and control, was beginning to blur. That afternoon, the sky over the city was veiled in a thin layer of smoke. I sat in the upstairs lounge of the foundation, staring out the wide window at the low rooftops beyond. The last light of the day slid across the wet streets, shimmering like scars of gold. I didn't know how long I'd been sitting there, only that the ticking clock reminded me time was still moving, even though inside me everything had stopped. Since the morning at the doctor's, Julian had barely left the building. I heard his voice downstairs, the low rumble of phone calls, sometimes Elias's steady steps, short, clipped, gone again. No one told me anything, but I knew it wasn't over. That evening, after everyone had gone, the house fell silent again. I went to the kitchen to make tea, craving something ordinary. When I came back, Julian was there. No footsteps, no warning, just him. as if he'd always known where to find me. "You shouldn't be walking around," he said softly. "Your ribs haven't healed. I just wanted some tea." "What kind?" "Mint," I said. "The only kind I found in your kitchen that feels human." He was quiet for a moment, then took a few slow steps closer. "Do you feel out of place here?" The question caught me off guard. "Why do you ask?" "Because I'm not sure you know what to do with silence," he said, eyes flicking to the cup in my hands. "I used to be the same." I didn't know how to answer. The lamplight drew faint shadows on his face, making him look both exhausted and unyielding. For a fleeting moment, I saw it clearly. Even power has its weight and loneliness. "Silence can be frightening," I whispered, "but it's safer than noise." Julian's gaze softened. He stepped closer, his voice dropping low, almost intimate. "I think I understand you more than I thought I did." My heart faltered. He was close now, too close. I could smell the faint scent of cedar on his shirt, the same scent I'd begun to associate with safety ever since that night. "You shouldn't stand this close to me," I said quietly, the words trembling out. "I don't mean to frighten you." "You don't." He tilted his head slightly. "Then what is it?" "It's too much, too close." A faint smile touched his lips, not warmth, but awareness. The kind of smile that belongs to someone who knows exactly where the line is and still lingers at the edge. "Some things," he murmured, "only exist when you're close enough to feel them." I didn't move. My whole body felt strung tight, every breath audible. Part of me wanted to run, the other wanted to stay, because near him I felt seen, protected, and dangerously unguarded all at once. Julian took a step back, as if he could read my thoughts. "I'm sorry," he said, his tone softer. "I forget sometimes. You don't belong to my world." "I don't know where I belong anymore," I whispered. He said nothing. We stood there, caught in a silence that felt like suspended time. Light from the window spilled across the floor, touching both our shadows, one powerful, one fractured. And I realized the distance between us wasn't built from status, but from loneliness. "Elias will take you to get your medicine tomorrow," he said finally. "If you need anything, call me." I nodded. He started to leave, then paused at the door. "Clara," he said without turning, "have you ever thought that fear might become the only place you feel safe?" I didn't answer. He was gone before I could. The door clicked shut. That night, I sat on the bed with a cup of cold tea between my palms. His question echoed in my mind. Can fear be a refuge? I used to think fear was something to escape, but now I understood. When fear wears the face of the one who saved you, it stops being darkness. It becomes a warped kind of light, warm, dangerous, and hard to turn away from. I touched the ache in my ribs, closed my eyes, and for the first time in years, I couldn't tell whether I was trembling from fear or from something else. The days that followed moved slowly, as if even time itself was learning to walk again after the storm. The bruises on my face faded, the ache in my ribs eased, and every morning I woke surprised to find I could breathe without fear. In that sunlit room, everything felt like it was being reborn, including me. Julian visited almost every day, always finding a reason to speak. Sometimes he brought coffee, sometimes just a question, small, irrelevant, but enough to start a conversation. He always had a reason, always kept a polite distance, but his eyes gave him away. I often caught him standing in the doorway of my studio, watching the paintings I restored, the light glinting on the fine cracks of old varnish. I was a restorer. My work was to mend what had been broken, to return shape to what others had given up on. Perhaps that was why I loved art. It was a wordless dialogue between what once was and what could be again. One afternoon, while I was sealing a 19th century portrait, Julian appeared behind me. He didn't speak, just watched. After a few minutes, I asked without turning, "Are you always this patient with people?" "No," he said softly, almost to himself. "But with you, I want to understand what I'm seeing." I set the brush down and turned to him. "There's nothing to understand, just cracks being filled." He stepped closer, stopping beside the table. "I used to think restoration meant hiding damage, but watching you, I see you're not hiding anything. You're just making the wound beautiful." I smiled faintly. Restoration isn't about erasing pain. It's about helping it exist more gracefully. Julian was quiet for a long moment, then said, "I do the same thing, in a way, only with people. I restore order. I clean up chaos." I looked at him. "And what if the thing you're fixing is already broken beyond repair?" He met my eyes. Then maybe the answer isn't fixing it. Maybe it's learning to live with the cracks. For a heartbeat, the space between us felt softer, as if the walls themselves had exhaled. I saw it then, the exhaustion in his posture, the fragility in his control. Power looked a lot like loneliness up close. Our conversations continued like that, quiet, simple, but heavy with meaning. He asked about color, about light, about how I knew what a painting needed. I asked about decisions, about how he knew what to do when the world turned against him. Somehow those questions fit together, two broken languages learning to speak. One morning, as I cleaned the edge of a frame, Julian said, "Have you noticed, Clara? We're doing the same work." "I don't follow." "You restore paintings, I restore order. We both make broken things look untouched." I let the words settle, like dust in sunlight. Maybe he was right. Maybe we were more alike than I wanted to admit. Two people trying to mend the world in our own flawed ways. When the afternoon light reached the wall, I noticed it too had changed, softer, warmer, as if the room itself had learned to breathe. Julian didn't leave right away. He stayed, sitting by the window, watching me work, occasionally asking a question, sometimes just silent. Between us, there were no sharp words or guarded stares anymore, only quiet, the kind of quiet that made you want to stay. I realized then that some emotions don't bloom in chaos. They grow in silence, the kind that knows how to heal. And in that moment, when I looked up, the light hit the painting I was restoring, and the colors came alive, as if they too had just awakened. I realized then that it wasn't only the painting finding its form again, it was me. That night, I was asked to organize Julian's private library. The room sat on the top floor, away from the rest of the house, where light barely touched through the thick curtains, and the scent of old wood mixed with paper, rich, deep, lonely. I switched on the small desk lamp. Golden light poured over the towering shelves. Thousands of books lined like silent sentinels of memory. Each book felt like a fragment of time. My fingers brushed their spines, sweeping dust as though wiping away ghosts. Some I recognized, art history, philosophy, French essays. But most were foreign: finance, politics, power, worlds I could never step into. Behind me, the door creaked open. I didn't turn. I knew it was him, Julian. He entered holding a glass of red wine, the liquid glowing darkly in the light, like blood caught in crystal. "I didn't think you were still here," he said, his voice low, rough from the day. "I wanted to finish this. The room feels like a maze." "It is," he said with a faint smile. "I get lost here myself sometimes." I turned. The lamp's glow cut his face in half, light and shadow. He looked tired, yet his eyes held that same quiet intensity, the kind born from too many years of control and solitude. "I see you read a lot about power," I said softly. "Do you do it to learn how to control people?" He set the glass down on the table. "No, I read them to learn how to control myself." I smiled slightly. "Funny, I read about art to forget myself, and you read to hold yourself together." His lips curved faintly, but the smile didn't last. Maybe we're both just trying to survive in the only language we know. I placed the last book on the shelf and turned, finding him suddenly close. The distance between us was barely half an arm's length. I could hear the faint ticking of the clock, the soft clink of wine in the glass he lifted. Time thickened between us. "I had a father," he said quietly. "He taught me emotion makes men weak, that if I ever wanted to stand, I had to need no one. I believed him for a long time." "I guess you don't anymore," I whispered. Julian's gaze met mine, conflicted, torn between moving closer and walking away. "Since that night," he said, so softly it barely reached me, "I haven't stopped thinking about you." My heart stumbled. The air felt electric, charged with things unsaid. I tried to speak, but my voice never came. He stepped closer. We were inches apart. I felt his breath against my cheek, warm, unsteady. His eyes lingered on my lips before darting away, as if fighting himself. But the restraint lasted only a heartbeat. Then his lips found mine. It wasn't sudden, it was inevitable. A kiss soft, restrained, alive with electricity. I could feel his pulse against my skin, the tension trembling between us. There were no words, only silence, long, heavy, utterly real. Then the phone rang, sharp, urgent. Julian pulled back instantly, drawing a long breath before answering. "Elias." His voice shifted, cold again. "I'll be right down." He hung up, glanced at me once, apology, conflict, everything unspoken in that one look. "I have to go," he murmured. I nodded. No words, no questions. Just the sound of his footsteps fading down the corridor, leaving the air still trembling around me. Only then did I realize my hands were shaking. Not from fear, but from something else entirely. Something beautiful, painful, and dangerous, like fire in the dark. I touched my lips. The taste of red wine lingered, and in that moment I knew everything had changed, not just between us, within me. I thought things would quiet down after that kiss, but they didn't. That was only the beginning. In the days that followed, Julian grew distant. He still came by, still spoke to me, with calm precision. But there was a gap between us now, a silence too fragile to name. Every time I wanted to speak, he seemed to stop himself, as if one more word could break everything. Nora noticed first. That evening, when I returned to the old apartment to pick up some clothes, she was waiting. Her eyes weren't innocent this time. They were sharp, worried, and angry. "What are you doing, Clara?" she asked without pretense. "Just work," I said quietly, fumbling with the lock. "Work?" she scoffed. "What kind of work makes Julian Varela take you to his private doctor and keep you in his mansion for a week?" I froze. Nora stepped closer, her hand gripping mine. "Do you even know who he is? They call him a patron of the arts, but behind that, is money, control, and blood. He's not a man you should trust. He's dangerous. Dangerous doesn't mean cruel, I murmured. But he could destroy you, she said, voice trembling. You're too gentle for his world. I didn't argue. I just held her. Maybe she was right. But there are doors that once crossed can never be closed again. The next day, Elias came to see me while I was restoring a painting. He didn't waste time. I don't know what's going on between you and Mr. Varela, he said evenly, but I know one thing. You are his only weakness. I turned, meeting his cold gaze. And that worries you? No, he said, it scares me, because in his world, weaknesses get exploited and punished. Those words clung to me like dust. That evening, Julian called me to his office. He told me to get ready. We were attending a dinner. With who? I asked. Anton Kreshnik, he said simply. The name froze the air between us. You're coming with me. The dinner took place in a golden-lit restaurant uptown, elegant and suffocating. Kreshnik arrived with a smooth smile, a cold handshake, and eyes that had seen too much power. I sat beside Julian, feeling every gaze in the room like heat on my skin. Miss Jensen, Kreshnik said, his accent thick. I heard about what happened. Unfortunate. I want to apologize. Julian said nothing, his hand motionless on the glass. Kreshnik went on, eyes gleaming. Sometimes men act foolishly without orders. I've already dealt with them. To close this matter, I'd like to offer compensation. He nodded, and an aide placed an envelope on the table. Thick, heavy. $50,000, he said. We're all reasonable men. No need to let a small mistake ruin good relations. Itigo Julian looked at the envelope for a long moment. Then he lifted his eyes, sharp, cutting. I don't sell my silence, he said slowly. No one in this world lays a hand on what's mine. The air froze. The smile drained from Kreshnik's face, leaving something harder beneath. I thought we could keep this civilized. Julian tilted his head slightly, voice calm and lethal. I've never liked civilized, Anton. They stared at each other, two predators in perfect stillness. The tension was thick enough to taste, and I knew then Julian's words weren't a threat. They were a declaration. The dinner ended early. In the car, he said nothing, his eyes fixed on the city, sliding by like a moving shadow. I wanted to speak, but something had shifted, something vast and unseen, tightening around us like a storm. And in that silence, I understood. The war had begun. The next morning, the house felt different. Guards changed shifts earlier than usual. Elias moved through the halls with tension written all over his face. Something had shifted. Julian didn't appear all morning, and the silence of the mansion pressed down until I could hear the seconds drip by like water into glass. In the afternoon, he summoned me to the library, the same room where everything had begun. He stood by the window, back to me, a cigarette unlit between his fingers. Sunlight sliced across his face, dividing it into light and shadow. I've made a decision, he said, voice rough but certain. You're moving here, tonight. I froze. Moving here? Yes, it's the safest place. I won't let anyone touch you again. A chill ran through me. Julian, I can't. He turned. Can't or won't. I can't live like that. I have my own life, my sister, my work, my apartment. All of which can be protected. Here, you'll have everything. I can take care of you, Clara. Take care of me. I laughed softly, something sharp cracking inside. You don't understand. I don't need to be taken care of. I need to be free. He stepped closer, every movement deliberate. Free? He repeated. You call walking alone through this city freedom? You call bleeding in an alley freedom? At least then, I chose where I went. He stared at me, searching. You don't understand, Clara. This isn't about choice anymore. You're part of my world now. And in my world, freedom is the rarest thing there is. I shook my head, voice trembling. I won't live in a cage, even if it's gilded. The air thickened, his eyes hardened. You think I'm trying to control you? I think you're trying to control your fear of losing me, I said quietly. And you can't. No one can. We stood facing each other, the distance between us suddenly infinite. Julian gave a faint, broken laugh. You don't know what it's like to lose everything and realize the only thing left can still be taken. I can't go through that again. You talk like I'm something to keep, I said. I'm not. I'm someone who chooses to stay. And if your choice gets you killed? His voice cracked, raw. I can't survive that, Clara. Not again. I saw his hands tremble as he hid them in his pockets. Not from anger, but fear. Real fear. For the first time, I understood. Beneath all the power, he was just a man. Terrified of the emptiness waiting if he lost me. The anger in me melted. I stepped closer, touched his hand. I get it, I whispered. You're scared. So am I. But love isn't a chain, Julian. It's a place we stand beside each other, not a cage we build around one another. He was silent for a long time. The evening light turned amber, brushing his face with warmth that looked like old scars. Then he said, low and certain, I love you, Clara, even though I shouldn't, even though it makes me weak. I love you. I exhaled, everything inside me loosening. I love you too, I said. Not the kind people write about. Ours is the love of two scarred souls. You afraid to lose, and me afraid to be kept. He took my hand and squeezed it gently. Then let me protect you in a way that lets us both breathe. I nodded, tears blurring my sight. I'll stay with Nora, but if it makes you sleep easier, have someone watch over me, quietly, no interference. I need to feel like I still belong to myself. He studied me for a long moment, then nodded. Agreed. Something shifted between us then. Not surrender, but understanding. Outside, rain began to fall, soft and steady, tapping against the window like an exhale. I looked up at him, and for the first time since the night in the library, Julian smiled, a real smile. You always make things complicated, he said softly. I just make them real, I answered. When he leaned down and pressed a kiss to my forehead, I realized our love wasn't a sanctuary. It was an open cage, fragile, dangerous, but chosen. And for now, that was enough. Time passed so quickly, I didn't notice the season had changed. The morning light looked different, softer, and in the mirror, the bruises on my skin had faded into pale memories. My body had healed, though my mind still lagged behind. Some nights I still dreamed of that wet alley, the footsteps behind me, the metallic smell of blood in the air. But when I woke, I wasn't afraid anymore. There was only the warm glow of the lamp and the quiet Julian had brought into my life, silent, steady, like an unspoken vow. One morning, while I was checking the final layer of varnish on an old painting, Julian came in. He rarely entered the restoration room while the staff was still there, but today he walked straight to me. Everyone stood up, the air turning taut, and I could only put my brush down and wait. Clara, he said, his voice calm yet warm. From today, you'll be head of restoration. The salary, benefits, and authority will match. Elias will handle the details. I stood still. All eyes were on me, and for a moment I didn't know how to react. When everyone had left and only the two of us remained, I asked quietly, "Why me?" "Because you deserve it," Julian replied without hesitation. "Not just for your skill, but for the way you see the world. You don't try to paint over what's faded. You let it live again." I lowered my head, hiding a smile. But when he left, I noticed a small envelope on my desk. No note, only a folded document, confirmation that my medical debt had been paid in full. The payer's name read Julian Varela. I froze. My whole body went cold. That afternoon, I went to his office. Julian was reviewing files, the sunlight pouring through the tall window and casting his shadow long across the floor. "You paid my debt?" I asked, my voice shaking slightly. He looked up, his expression calm. "Yes. Why?" "Because I could." I swallowed hard, warmth and ache tangled inside my chest. Do you know how that makes me feel? Like I've been bought, like everything I struggled to survive for suddenly means nothing. Julian stood, took a step toward me, but I stepped back. He stopped, exhaled. "Clara," he said slowly, "I didn't pay it to own you. I did it because I wanted to put you where you belong. I'm not giving charity. I'm acknowledging your worth." I looked into his eyes and saw no arrogance there, only a strange kind of honesty, rare in men of power. "I didn't need you to do that," I whispered. "Maybe not," he said softly. "But I needed to. Sometimes healing isn't about reclaiming what was lost. It's about letting someone help you stand again." I didn't answer, but in that silence the anger in me dissolved. The weeks that followed were busy. I had my own team now, my own projects, my own office filled with natural light and the faint smell of oil paint. Julian still appeared unannounced, sometimes just to ask, "Are you all right?" 3 small words that meant more than any grand gesture. Between us, there was no tension anymore, only a quiet understanding that settled deeper with each day. Then one evening, as I was packing to leave, Elias came in. His face was grave. "He needs you," he said simply. I followed him to the main office. Julian sat at his desk, a newspaper unfolded before him. The headline read in bold, "Anton Kreshnik dies in East Harbor explosion." I read the article once, then looked up. "Was it you?" Julian didn't meet my eyes. "No, but perhaps it was something he earned." "And now what will you do?" "Nothing." I frowned. "You won't expand?" "The eastern docks are open now. It's your chance to take them." Julian leaned back in his chair, eyes on the darkening window. "For the first time in my life, I don't want to take anything. I just want to keep." "Keep?" He nodded, voice low but soft. "Keep the things that remind me I'm still human. You're one of them, Clara." I couldn't speak. I just looked at him. The man who once made a city bow, now sitting there with eyes calm and almost fragile, as if he'd finally learned how to survive without conquest. When I left his office, the sky outside was deep violet. The wind moved gently through the trees, carrying the scent of fading rain. I stepped into the courtyard, felt the chill slip beneath my coat, and for the first time I understood. Healing isn't about forgetting pain. It's about learning to live with it and to choose something better out of the ruins. Julian had chosen to keep, and I had chosen to stay. Not because of debt, not because of safety, but because I wanted to see for myself whether a man like him could truly change, and whether love, the most fragile thing in the world, could be strong enough to make us both real, softer, and whole again. In the days that followed, everything seemed to return to normal. But it wasn't the same kind of normal anymore. Something in me and in him had changed, as if after the storm, we were both learning how to breathe under a new sky. I once thought my life would always be a string of blurred days. Wake up, work, go home, exist without ever being truly seen. But now, when I look at myself in the mirror each morning, my eyes are different. Not because I'm no longer afraid, but because within that fear, I've learned how to exist. From someone invisible, I've become someone seen, not just by Julian, but by myself. The world around me has changed too. Nora returned to our small apartment, now filled with light. She cooks, she laughs more, and though worry still lingers in her eyes, I know she's accepted it. One evening she said, "I don't understand why you stay with him, but if he truly makes you smile, I'll stop being afraid." I looked at her and smiled. No one makes me smile. I just allow myself to. And in that moment I realized, perhaps growing up simply means learning not to wait for someone to save you, yet still daring to love. The days that followed were strangely peaceful. No more shadows following me, no more midnight phone calls. Julian went out less. He spent more time in his top-floor office, where the light streamed through the thick glass, stretching long gold lines across the floor. Sometimes he would watch me work in silence, saying nothing, just smiling faintly. One early morning, I woke to a soft knock. The world outside was still drenched in mist, the light like a wet silk veil over the city. Julian stood there, holding 2 cups of coffee. "Get up," he said, his voice low and husky. "I want to show you something." We went up to the rooftop. The air was cold but gentle. The city below was still asleep, only a few windows glowing, like lanterns keeping time for the dying night. I stood beside him, holding the warm cup, breathing in the wind mixed with the faint scent of smoke. "This is where I come when I can't sleep," he said, eyes on the horizon. "I used to see only buildings, streets, numbers, but since you, I see something else." I tilted my head. "What do you see now?" Julian turned to me. His eyes were no longer cold. They were warm, calm, like still water. "You've made me see the city through different eyes." I smiled. "Because now you're looking through the eyes of the person you'd die for." He laughed softly, a rare, honest laugh that vanished into the wind. The first light of dawn rose behind the buildings. The sun wasn't whole yet, but brilliant, reflecting off glass and early smoke, making the city seem reborn. Julian set his coffee down and turned toward me. "You know," he said quietly, "all my life I've known how to take, to hold, to fear losing. But with you, for the first time, I just want to let things be. Not to control, not to own, just to keep by trusting." I looked at him, feeling my heart slow and settle. "And I said, used to think freedom meant belonging to no one. But real freedom is being with someone and still being yourself." We stood there, watching the sun rise through the thin veil of fog, turning the sky into amber. The light touched his hair, framing it like fire. He turned to me, gently pulling me into his arms. His embrace wasn't possession, it was a promise, quiet and human, filled with the breath of 2 souls that had once been lost. As the sunlight filled the rooftop, I heard my heartbeat blend with his. No more borders, no more darkness, only 2 people, with all their scars, standing side by side before a new morning. Julian whispered against my ear, his voice like wind. "You made me live again." I looked up, a smile rising on my lips. No, Julian, you just finally let yourself live. The sun climbed higher, golden and full, spilling across the buildings, the streets, the waking world. And in that light, I knew we had made the right choice. Not an ending, but a beginning, a quiet one, where both of us were free within the love we had chosen.